Hello guys, Crispy here, welcome back to another video. In this one, my friends, I'm gonna be testing a GeForce GTX 1050 Ti in God of War Ragnarok. This one is the Asus ROG STRIX version of the card. We are running it with the latest Nvidia drivers, and I am overclocking it today, okay? Just slightly, not even pushing the power limit here. These are overclocks that you should be capable of achieving with all 1050 Ti's, and this is just to give it a little bit better of a chance, because it's an old and slow GPU, let's be real. Over in Tech Power-Ups GPUs, you can see all of the GPU specs as usual, and over on the left, I'm pairing it with the Ryzen 5 3600X and 16GB of DDR4 3200MHz RAM in dual channel. Let's get into it, shall we? Oh yeah, by the way, 4GB is below the minimum requirements, and you will always see this popping up whenever you launch the game. Previously, you couldn't even launch the game on 4GB GPUs, but now they patched it and you can. You just click OK and God of War Ragnarok will start playing. Alrighty, here we go. We're playing at 1080p first using native TAA, 141% VRAM already. Okay, so it's already running out of VRAM at these settings. Kind of expected since they ask for 6 gigs as a minimum. And, well, the FPS that we're getting here are very similar, although slightly lower than the GTX 1063GB that I tested earlier in this game as well in the previous video. So yeah, I honestly was expecting this, because usually the GTX 1060 is around like 60% faster, but here it's only like a couple of FPS faster than the 1050 Ti, because the VRAM matters a lot. Now, maybe at lower resolutions or with FSR quality it will run a little bit better, but for now it is a terrible experience. It's always below 30, I guess, and that VRAM is not enough to put it above or even match the 1063GB. So if you bought the 3GB 1060 and you thought, I am getting screwed because the 1050 Ti has 4 gigs and this only has 3, maybe in the future it will run a little bit worse than 1050 Ti. No, it's not gonna happen. This is way slower than 1060, so I doubt it will ever be faster than 1063 gig. Anyway, FSR 3.1 is now set to quality. VRAM usage went up, by the way. That happens as we play the game. It's not because of FSR 3.1 being enabled that it went up. Let's start counting our FPS. It's still dropping into the 20s like this, guys. Needless to say, I think that if you have a GTX 1050 Ti, you should not buy God of War Ragnarok. Go play the previous one if you haven't already. The story is amazing, and then upgrade your GPU for this if you like that. But at least God of War 2018 actually ran pretty well, I think, from what I remember, on the GTX 1050 Ti, so you can have fun, okay, in a God of War title. Now, look at that, guys, 23 and 24. For some reason, this little area here just kills the 1050 Ti completely. We need to drop it down, guys. Let's do performance. Or should we do Ultra Performance? You know what? Let's do Ultra Performance FSR, which means that we're playing the game at 360p resolution, alright? And being upscaled to 1080p. And this is finally enough to put us at 30, 31... Still kind of terrible, because it's low 30s, and that means that it will definitely drop down. It already dropped into the 20s, okay? It looks really bad right now. I mean, if you stand still and if you don't look at the water, it actually looks really decent for what it is, right? This is 360p resolution. It doesn't look anywhere near as bad as native 360p, for example, because of the upscaling part once again. But yeah, that water, dude, it just gets wrecked completely. And I mean, even with quality FSR 3.1, the water isn't too pretty at 1080p resolution, even at 4K quality FSR and DLSS quality as well. This water is probably the weakest point of God of War Ragnarok. It shimmers and flickers way too much. So this is expected once again, but everywhere else is just, it's kind of insane in terms of the graphical quality and what FSR 3.1 is doing to upscale that image. Like, these rocks look 720p, maybe even better than that, honestly. No shimmering, no noise, kind of crazy. Now, this isn't really the most intensive area, but it already dropped from 30 FPS to 29, so I guess we should just leave it right there for 1080p resolution, or maybe enable some FSR FG. Yeah, let's try that out. You know what? Let's do quality FSR 3.1 with FSR FG with the GTX 1650. It didn't perform very well for some reason. Yeah, with this one, it's the same thing. FPS are at 40 and sometimes can touch 50, but you're seeing this, right? It feels like it's running at 20 FPS or at half frame rate that we're seeing right now. So the frame-generated frames aren't really working here. It's just giving us a terrible experience in terms of input lag as well as in terms of the actual perceived smoothness. It's not there, guys. Like, it's pretty terrible with FG, unfortunately. Maybe in other areas it will work fine, but this is the most intensive area that I've come across so far, and it's terrible, as you saw. So let's drop it down to 720p. I'll need to do it in the desktop because the game doesn't have an actual full screen mode. Here we go, 720p, native res, low settings. VRAM is still over the limit, unfortunately, but it shouldn't be much of an issue right now. It's getting 30s, guys. I'm not liking this. That means that it will still drop from 30 FPS in the more intensive scenarios. So yeah, I mean, in 90% of the game, it will stay above 30 FPS if you play at 720p native resolution with low settings and the 1050 Ti. So if you're happy with that experience and you have a really small monitor so you don't see the blurriness and the shimmering from 720p and the noise, the pixelation, you could play the game like this. I mean, it's probably better than a Steam Deck experience, honestly, in terms of that resolution and the graphical quality as well. So there's that. A lot of people are playing the game on the Steam Deck, I guess, since it actually is Steam Deck verified. But hey, as a PC gamer and as someone who's used to playing games at 30 plus FPS, or at least 60 FPS, this is not a great experience. And given that the GPU costs less than the game itself, I can't recommend this. Obviously, it's up to you whether or not you want to buy the game. You have the GTX 1050 Ti. I'm showing you the performance in worst case scenarios. So you do whatever you want with that information, but I'm just telling you, my opinion is you shouldn't really get this one with this particular GPU, especially given that at native 1080p, even with low settings, but especially with medium settings, the game looks fantastic, and you can upgrade to something cheap like a 5700 XT, like I said, with a 1063GB video, and it will be miles better, or kilometers better, if you go by the metric system, which is superior, of course. So far, so good. 1% lows are at 29. I'm not sure if it did drop down into the 20s. Maybe it did for a second, but here is the actual most intensive area, and look at that. It drops into the mid-20s sometimes. Look at that, 27. Yep, not good, guys, not good. So we'll still need to utilize something like FSR on quality to achieve 30 plus, maybe? Is that possible? Wait a second. Whenever you move really quickly like this and turn the camera around like this is where it starts dropping the most. Yeah, I guess FSR quality at 720p resolution will do it. So again, you're kind of having a Steam Deck experience, I think. I'm not really sure how that's running this game, but I bet it is running at FSR quality or balanced or something like that, with 30 FPS locked, because for the type of game and for its optimization, and given that I actually tried a few titles on the Steam Deck previously, yeah, I expect that, you know, some drops into the 20s still, but with a controller it's not as noticeable, so it's doable, okay, on the Steam Deck probably. But yeah, with mouse and keyboard at least it doesn't really feel that great, and look at that. It still drops to 29 FPS in worst case scenarios. And yes, this is way more intensive than fighting some of the bosses and so on, and seeing an entire city from above. I don't know why. This area is just a little bit broken. I found it here to be the most intensive thing that I've come across, And well, I am sticking to it to test some of these GPUs, you know. And that's it, guys, for the GTX 1050 Ti. Should I try some frame generation as well? I mean, we've already found basically 472p resolution or 720p with FSR quality is the way to go with the 1050 Ti. But let's try it with some frame gen. Try to make it better. I don't think it's gonna work. Yeah, it's still choppy as hell. Look at that. Whenever the base FPS are at like 30 and you enable FG in this game, it does a very poor job. Right now with 40s, it's not terrible. Well, right here, yeah, it is again. It just feels like it's running at 20 frames per second. The GPU usage doesn't even max out for some reason. It's extremely weird. It's probably because any form of frame generation increases your VRAM usage, and it just craps itself because it doesn't have any more VRAM, right? So yeah, this is the end result. I don't feel like the frames are being generated properly. So that's it. I'm gonna stop it there. Shorter video here on the 1050 Ti, but I think that's enough. You shouldn't buy the game with this. It's still very impressive how well it's optimized, and compared to something like Wukong on the 1050 Ti, I mean, this sure is playable, but I would never buy a $60 game, €60 game with such a GPU. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one. Love you all. Bye-bye.